Hello and welcome to the second edition of Hyper Annotation. Here we are with you in Venice Biennale, 59th edition of Venice Biennale. Today we are talking with Ali Cherri, artists that have a work in the main show. Can you tell us about the work that you are having presenting in the main show, how it's like situating with the other works?
So I'm showing three works in the biennial. I'm showing three large sculptures called ANNOTATIONS and a series of watercolor drawings and 3-channel video installation. It's a project I started working on, it's been since 2017. The video is shot in northern Sudan near a dam, a hydroelectric water dam called the Marawi Dam. It's one of the large dams that are on the Nile River. And it's shot on a brickyard, traditional brickyard just by the dam, where brick makers make, mud brick for construction, used for construction. And the work looks at the materiality of mud that's coming together of earth and water, and all the imageries that it creates. How humanity has always saw in mud, the creation, all creation myth, like Adam's created from mud, the golems in Gilgamesh and Kudu is created from mud. So we've always saw in mud as the beginning of life, and with a lot of, and the possibility of imagining, a different world. But also at the same time it looks at inundation and deluge as the opposite, as, the muddy water that comes and destroy everything. And looking historically, mythologically, how deluge was always used, as a form of reset of history. It's like God sends the deluge, to erase everything, and we can build on the ruins of the past. So looking at mud as being, the beginning and the end, life and death, and how it relates to the theme of the biennial here. Of course, it's this coming together of elements and the imaginaries around these elements that create a possibility of imagining a different world, but also I look at it as as imagination as a political tool to create change. You have to be able to imagine a different world in order to even start to try to change the world. It's like looking at imagination, really at the power of imagination as a strategy, political strategy, in order to propose or create political change. So that's for the installation. With the installation, the sculptures are also made from mud. They're like three creatures, mud creatures, with inspiration from different cultures, looking at, how humanity, saw this, eruption of, forms of life.
That's really amazing, because actually I was going to ask, because this Biennale somehow looks into the future and talks about how we want to talk about future.
Yeah.
And at the same time I wanted to ask you how you bring together this past and future, because your work somehow tries to have this conversation between past and future too. But so maybe then I somehow got the response here, but now maybe I'm going to ask you about institutions and venues like Biennale, because your work is somehow always in conversation or in a critical inquiry with the institutional spaces too.
Yeah.
So how do you see that in the space of Biennale, or maybe we can somehow connect it to the COVID era too. Now the institutional spaces are somehow different, the circulating of the work, or generally how they function. Okay. So how do you see that in relation to your own work or in general?
Okay. My work, my interest in institutional practice is really looking at what does an institution, a museum, a biennial, what does it do to objects, to things, and how this power structure does affect or it doesn't. How does it shape our reading of object, things that are within its wall, looking at it as a producer of knowledge, but also producer of discourse, and how can we challenge the discourse of the institution, of the museum, of the biennial, by looking differently at objects that have been, put in a constellation to try to tell, the curator's view, or like a thematic view of things. So I mean, this work, of course, is described in a larger project that I've been working on, whether looking at like things, objects within institution, but also looking at the question of violence and how this relation is always producing violence. So violence could be from landscapes of violence, like with the story of the water dam that I was telling you about with the video. This is land where the construction of the dam, like most dam building, was very destructive. It's considered one of the most destructive projects in the world for the environment, for local population. But today, when you go to the Marawi Dam, the dam was opened in 2009. When you go today, you only see like this beautiful lake. But under this lake, there have been like villages, people's lives, they were buried under these waters. So I try to look at traces, how traces of violence could sometimes be disseminated into the elements, how by looking at these traces sometimes are not visible, but they come like part of the landscape. So like the work that I've recently done at the National Gallery, which was also related to violence, but there I was looking at institutional practice against violence. How hard do they deal with the eruption of, I was looking at vandalism, at paintings that were vandalized within the National Gallery, and looking at the museum as a political site of protest. So people would walk into like a museum and decide to destroy a work of art. So why does that happen? But more importantly for me was, how does the institution deal with these questions, the response to violence? Because we have a responsibility of how to write or include these narrative or these stories within the history of the works.
I was also thinking about how you have always worked with objects and matter, or like elements. And as you said, they have always been present. And so we try to resituate ourselves, or like find new discourses, find new vocabularies. And I'm maybe trying to go a step back again, talking about surrealism. Do you find it a relevant discourse that has been resurfacing in approaching, to art history, generally to art world, how it's functioning, how we are like even outside the art itself? Is it a useful discourse?
Actually, I'm just an observer of this, and I agree. I mean, there is like it's not all of a sudden. These things don't happen suddenly. I mean, we know like an exhibition like this one is prepared at least 2 years ahead. Like I know when I was showing the work at the National Gallery in London, there was a lot of comments from visitors who saw in this lots of the things I was showing could be traced to a surrealist movement, but this was happening at the same time when there was a big show at the Tate about surrealism beyond borders, but also there was a Louis Bourgeois exhibition. There's like all these artists, like all of a sudden we could see, who are interested in creating imaginaries of different worlds, but also from a very political stand, whether it's post-war or related to conflict, to violence. So I think these could be traces, or of our current times, the time that we live in today, and that's all of a sudden something like surrealism has become very relevant. I don't have an over discourse about it. I just observe, and I agree that there is something happening around this.
Thank you so much. That was interesting. And maybe for the last question, I want to use this opportunity to ask about the feature film that you're going to be premiering in Cannes, I guess. Can you tell us a little about that too?
Yes, actually, part of the project that I shot in Sudan is the 3-channel video installation, but I was also working on a fiction feature film, so shot with the workers of the brickyard. There's no actors in the film, it's the actual workers, it's the actual places, but it's a fiction film where we follow one of the workers who every evening leaves the brickyard and goes into the desert to build this structure that all of a sudden start taking a life of its own. And the film happens in the backdrop of the Sudanese revolution, because we started shooting in 2019, in the beginning of the revolution in Sudan, and we were shooting actually when there was the coup d'etat and Omar al-Bashir were thrown out, and we had to leave the country, then come back, to finish the shoot, and we were supposed to come back in 2020, then 2021 because of COVID. So the film really looks at how a major political moment, like a time of a revolution, the end of 30 years of dictatorship, how it could be lived from the margins, how this political event is lived from far, from, the brickyard is 7 hours away from Khartoum, from the capital, and how these two temporalities could exist at the same time. There's the current moment, political time of the revolution, and there's like a much longer or larger time, which is the time of these workers who are repeating gestures that were done for thousands of years. These bricks have been made the same way for thousands of years. The pyramids that are just next to the site have been made in the same way they create these bricks. So looking at two political or two historical times, but also how these workers felt in a way they lost the ability of being, like a citizen with the power of creating a change, like how oppressive regimes really they take hostage even the imaginaries, that these people could not even imagine a world without Omar al-Bashir. They can't even imagine a life without the dictatorship. So I was interested in this, like how through the power of imagination again, we can create change.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really look forward to watch your film, and thank you for talking to us.
It's a pleasure.
Cherri, thank you for joining us.
Thanks.